The bill will be now read the second time. The honourable member for Nelson.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak on the Police Offences Amendment Act 2025. With just a few remarks, it's a mixed of a bill in that there's parts of the bill that are unremarkable and uncontentious and sensible changes and reforms, and that I think all of us or most of us are pleased to see. There's other parts that perhaps have some questions around them but seem to be headed in the right direction, and then there's some aspects of it, the bill, that are seem to remain a little problematic in terms of the approach taken and whether it's hit the mark. There is no question that each of the issues that are being addressed by the bill are valid issues to be addressing, and certainly the ones that I will just speak about to some extent because I have some concerns about their treatment in the bill. It's not because I in any way resile from the fact that there are issues to be addressed there. So, for example, on road rage, certainly we are all very familiar with experiencing some form of road rage, either directed to us or directed to other people in whose car we're travelling, or observing occur on the road around us, potentially perpetrated by us at times, who knows. Certainly I'll admit to mild forms, some choice words at times, perhaps, Mr President. But the odd gesture, maybe. So I mean, I'm making light of it, but I don't mean to, because it actually can have serious consequences, of course. There can be serious intimidation occurring. There can be absolutely people feeling in danger, and we all know what it's like when we've just made an oopsie by perhaps pulling out at the wrong moment or going, oh, shouldn't have done that, and then someone really lets us know we shouldn't have done that, and you feel quite dreadful. But it probably doesn't warrant the response that you got anyway. So, Mr President, that's to say we don't need to quibble about there being an issue to address. And the idea is, I guess, as point of discussion, what is the effective way and the appropriate and proportionate way to address that issue? And effective is the main one. You know, coming in to this place to represent your community and want to do a good job in that, want to make sure that views and concerns held by your community are brought to here, considered well, met with acknowledgement and good solutions, is a shared sentiment, I think, all around this chamber. The thing that I'm really focused on is that sometimes in acknowledging the genuineness of a problem to be solved and acknowledging the genuineness of a community's desire to see solutions for that, can then travel into proposed policy solutions and legislative solutions that actually, while seemingly purporting to address and provide a solution, don't, on all evidence, fail to do that. And I think that's problematic, because then when we go back to our community and say, guess what, I represented you, I heard your concerns, I've acted on it, I've passed this piece of legislation and helped it get through, and actually it's legislation that won't meaningfully address those concerns or may be problematic in the way that it does, then I think that's an unfortunate thing, ultimately. So I'm, with my approach, very focused on evidence base and what evidence tells us will work to genuinely address issues and deliver a solution. So in that space, with this bill, I do have some concerns, and these are going to be echoes of things raised in more detail by others in their contributions, and I acknowledge the contributions made by each member that's spoken here today. I think a range of good questions have been put forward, and I'm interested to hear the answers provided, and won't necessarily repeat those questions in my contribution. And I think some of the things I'll raise aren't unique, but they're the ones that I would just like to focus on. So penalties, increased penalties is one in the bill. It's really clear there is no evidence to tell us that increased penalties will act as an effective greater deterrent to offences occurring. It's as simple as that. And we can note that referred to in a number of submissions made on the exposure draft of this bill back when it was out for consultation. Of particular note from the TASCOS submission where they talk about these increased penalties provided for in the bill. And they note in their submission, I'm just going to quote from it, page 7, the underlying assumption of the proposed changes in the bill is that increased penalties will reduce offending. However, academic research into sentencing and its impact on criminal behaviour show that that is not always the case. As noted by the Tasmanian Law Reform Institute, there is little support for the proposition that harsher sentencing brings about any significant reduction in the crime rate. TASCOS is also concerned about the disproportionate impact of fines on people on low incomes, noting academic research demonstrating the inherent unfairness of imposing financial penalties as punishment, as the impact of such penalties is significantly harsher for those on low incomes. And it goes on to say, TASCOS does not support the introduction of clauses increasing penalties and recommends these clauses are withdrawn from the bill. As an alternative, and I like that this is the case in this submission, Mr President, they go on to propose an alternative. It says, as an alternative to increased penalties, we recommend the Tasmanian Government focuses on strategies and initiatives to prevent crime and investing in community-based services to support people with underlying needs contributing to criminal behaviour, such as unaddressed mental health issues, alcohol and other drug use or homelessness. And this is, I think, the case, Mr President, that there has simply been, for a very extended period now, particularly the last 12 years under this government, absolute underinvestment and lack of focus on those preventative efforts in the criminogenic precursors to offences and crimes being committed. We've seen an underinvestment there. We've also seen greater division driven in our community. We've seen greater cost of living stress being experienced by our community. We've seen a bigger cleaving between those who have and those who don't have in our community. Our Two Tasmania scenario has got worse over these 12 years under this government. And all of that, far from preventing higher incidences of crime, is actually driving higher incidents of crime and antisocial behaviour and all those sorts of things that we see that are genuinely unpleasant and awful experiences for people in our communities. So, Mr President, I want to put on the record that it might make us feel good to increase penalties and think that we're making a harsher consequence for crime and that that is the right thing to do, but no evidence tells us that it's the right thing to do. And it will not achieve the outcome that's desired by all of us. So that's one aspect of it that I wanted to comment on, Mr President. And the other, in terms of some specific aspects of the bill, I think I'll just touch on around the matter of the new offence of road rage, because again, I think there's some smoke and mirrors here that are performative in this bill. And again, absolutely genuine issue to address, absolutely genuine community concern and harm being caused that need to be addressed and acknowledged. But I'm concerned that we have gone about this in a way that's less well considered than it might have been. We've had other members, I think it was Member for Hobart in her contribution, and that mentioned some things that I was going to touch on around the fact that we're dealing with this differently to other jurisdictions, where one narrative is we might be bringing ourselves into alignment because we're addressing it, and other jurisdictions have legislatively addressed it. We're doing it in a different way to those other jurisdictions, and I think in a way that's less effective and more potentially problematic. I do know that I think in some of the other jurisdictions, potentially, I think it's the Australian Capital Territory and New South Wales, where they have, Queensland and New South Wales have explicitly included road rage as an aggravating factor in sentencing options rather than standalone offence in this way. There's also different sorts of descriptive language that is more sort of specific around menacing driving and things like that in other jurisdictions. I think that hit the mark more effectively than what we've landed on here, and I'll speak more about the specific language and elements of the clause there shortly. Western Australia also doesn't have a separate offence of road rage as such. Rather, it's seen as it's an aggravating circumstance in terms of other offences. It's not clear to me what consideration was given of actually looking at those approaches and applying them here. I'm concerned about it for sure. And to speak about it specifically in terms of what we're looking to insert with this bill into the Police Offences Act, the 37FA road rage clause there. There are elements of it that the legal experts who have made submissions on the exposure draft of the bill have highlighted as being particularly problematic. Both the Law Society and Tasmanian Legal Aid specifically are concerned about the language that's in 37FA 1A, where it's done in a manner that the person knows or ought to know is likely to cause alarm, distress, apprehension or fear in another person, given that those are potentially difficult things because there are very different triggers and very different levels of resilience and levels of sensitivity around those sorts of things amongst the community. So what I might anticipate to cause those things could be quite different from what in reality does. And so then I think that brings us to some difficulties in trying to faithfully apply this. Some of those legal experts who made submissions have suggested that this proposed provision is far too broad in the language it uses. Concerns have been raised about language in 37FA 1B4, for instance, where one of the things it may result in under B is for a risk of danger to a person, where a risk of danger to a person is a very, very broad thing. There's a small risk in getting into a car in the first place. There's a small risk in many instances. You could jump up and down and say boo on the side of the road. It could be deemed to be a risk, minor potentially, but with this language, a risk of danger is a very broad way to interpret it. They've suggested that simplified language there might be prudent, taking out the words a risk of. The other thing that's been raised, I think, in some of these submissions, which really merits attention, is, and I'm looking now at a submission made by Tasmania Legal Aid, and they suggest that if this provision is to remain, they say this: it is strongly recommended that further consideration be given to rewording and or amending the section to ensure there is a distinction between behaviour which poses a threat to other road users and is already the subject of criminal sanctions and behaviour which is merely offensive. And in that, they're looking at some of the things that would be captured potentially, I think, over the page. So in 1B5, no, sorry, 1 in 2, I think, 2A of that provision, where it's part of the definition of a driving-related act, meaning an act that under A consists of threatening, abusive, obscene, offensive, profane or insulting words, gestures or behaviour. Now, much as all of those things can be regarded as distasteful and unfortunate and unnecessary and certainly offensive, to be effectively, in some sense, bringing them into criminalising them becomes problematic, I think. Much as I might not like it, Mr. President, actually, for somebody to be profane or insulting and things like that, because it's a grey, muddy area between somebody's right to be expressive in ways that we may find insulting and profane, whatever it might be, but to actually then bring a sanction in through our legal system for that is dicey. Is what that's being suggested in some of these submissions, and I am inclined to agree. I think it's problematic. It begins to look like curbing behaviour that actually, much as we may not like it, is part of a normal spectrum of behaviour. And what I imagine people might say is, well, that's not the intention of this. It's not the intention of this. This is to capture certain sorts of things. But the fact of the matter is, if it's written and drawn up in legislation in a way that's too broad, beyond what you might be intending it to capture and the way you might intend it to be interpreted, that if it's too broad, it then will necessarily potentially capture other things too beyond that. And I think that's why the concerns are being raised in these submissions. Mr. President. I'm looking at a submission here from the Law Society, and they expressed it similarly to the to Tasmanian Legal Aid. So the Law Society said, a distinction must be maintained between behaviour which poses a threat to other road users and is already the subject of criminal sanctions and behaviour which is offensive. Whilst the latter behaviour is not to be encouraged, it should certainly not be criminalised. The provision as drafted, and because of its breadth, creates a danger of the criminal law being weaponised and unnecessarily diverting police resources. I think any of those sorts of concerns being raised should give us pause for thought when we are introducing a new offence in this way. I would have thought that the intent and the intended outcomes of a new offence should be able to be delivered without the legal profession and legal experts raising these sorts of concerns. And yet we're charging ahead with something which still has those hanging over it, those concerns. So that gives me pause for thought, certainly. I'm mindful, Mr. President, that I don't want to take up a great deal of time with my contribution because, as I said, I do endorse the more detailed contributions made by some others, and I don't feel the need to repeat much of it other than the bits that are of particular interest or concern to me. It will be interesting to see, and I guess this is where, you know, the rubber hits the road, and hopefully it's something that we'll be able to pay attention to here in this place. If we pass this piece of legislation, largely as it is, we will look to, I guess, further down the track to see what evidence can be provided of the difference, if any, that it's made. And that's where, I guess, the proof will be in the pudding, Mr. President. We know what evidence tells us is likely to occur as a result of a range of these measures, and that's nothing. Except actually people being further criminalised for things that are potentially problematic, people being fined more heavily in some areas in ways that might be potentially ultimately much more harmful, and ironically enough, horrifically ironically enough, might become criminogenic in and of themselves because of the way that fine impacts on the person and their lives and their families and etc. So, you know, criminal justice is a complex area. Addressing criminal behaviour is a complex area. It's rarely something simplistic that can be done that actually delivers a straightforward outcome. We raise these penalties and straightforwardly less of this bad thing happens. Doesn't work that way, much as we would love it to. So we will be able to hopefully track impact or otherwise of this legislation as it goes through. I have sent around to members, I've drawn up just two very basic amendments for us potentially to consider during committee stage if the bill goes through to committee stage. They are by no means looking to fix all the things that I think are probably unfortunate about this piece of legislation, but they do pick up on a couple of matters raised in some submissions, I think without too intensively intruding on the intent of the bill. So generally when I'm looking to amend something, sometimes I really do want to change something in a bill, Mr President, and get it out. With these amendments that I'm potentially going to be looking to bring in the committee stage, it's more about making some tweaks to take some of the problematic aspects to dial them back a bit. So I'm hoping members, I've shared those earlier, and hopefully members might give some thought to that, and if it comes to that, we'll discuss it during the committee stage. But on that, Mr President, there's lots of good elements of this bill, some really straightforwardly some straightforward good changes and updates and whatnot. There's some other bits that I feel a little bit lukewarm about, but some of these things still cause me some concern, and I think it's unfortunate because I think it's sort of partly misleading of the public to be suggesting that what we might do here today in passing this is some form of effective solution.